Welcome back, beloved soul. This is the 6th reflection in our 9-part journey through wisdom, character, and the quiet strength that shapes a life. In today's story, we turn toward humility, not as silence, not as self-erasure, but as the courage to listen when we are certain we are right. Through an ancient dispute beneath an olive tree, we'll explore how wisdom deepens when certainty pauses, and how truth, when held with humility, can heal what force never could. If you've ever felt the tension between being right and being wise, this story is for you. Let us begin.
The olive grove at the edge of the village had belonged to 3 families for generations. Its shade had sheltered births, mournings, betrothals, and the slow, necessary work of grinding meal and pressing fruit. It was here that disputes were often settled, not because anyone had appointed it as a place of judgment, but because something about the gray, twisted trunks and the soft rustle of silvered leaves seemed to call people toward patience. The trees had grown slowly. They seemed to ask that words do the same. On this particular morning, 2 men sat beneath the largest of the olives, their voices low but unmistakably tense. A handful of others stood at a respectful distance, watching but not yet interfering. Among them was Azariah, a teacher of the law whose reputation in the surrounding villages was built not on wealth or position, but on the clarity of his reasoning and the steadiness of his moral conviction. He was not a priest. He held no formal office. But when the people needed someone to interpret a difficult passage or mediate a question of fairness, it was often Azariah they sought. Azariah had earned that trust through years of careful study, through nights spent bent over scrolls, through his refusal to speak carelessly or give opinions where he was not certain. And yet it was this very certainty, honed over decades, that had begun to settle in him like a second spine. He no longer noticed when it stiffened his posture or sharpened his tone. He only knew that he spoke the truth, and that speaking it clearly was a kind of service. The 2 men, Azariah and Nadav, sat beneath the tree were brothers. Their father had died 3 harvests ago, and since then, the question of how to divide his land had festered between them like an untreated wound. The elder, Nadav, claimed that the inheritance customs gave him the larger portion by right. The younger, Talmai, insisted that their father had spoken differently in his final days, promising an equal share to both sons. There were no witnesses to this supposed promise, only Talmai's word. Azariah had agreed to hear them both and offer his judgment. It was a role he had filled many times before, and as he listened now, his mind was already turning toward the conclusion. The law was clear. The customs were established. Nadav, as the firstborn, was entitled to a double portion unless there was written evidence to the contrary. And there was none. He waited for both brothers to finish speaking. He asked a few clarifying questions. And then, with the unhurried confidence of a man who had considered these matters for years, he offered his ruling. Nadav was in the right. Talmai's face tightened. He did not shout or argue. He simply stood, looked at Azariah for a long moment, and walked away without a word. The silence he left behind was heavy. Nadav, too, seemed unsettled. He thanked Azariah quietly and departed, but there was no satisfaction in his step. Azariah remained beneath the tree, watching them go. He told himself he had done what was just. He had applied the law. He had not shown favoritism. And yet, something in Talmai's silence lingered in his chest like a splinter too small to remove. That evening, Azariah returned to his home, a modest dwelling of mud brick and timber that he shared with his wife Miriam and their youngest son, who was still learning the trade of carpentry from an uncle in a neighboring village. Miriam greeted him with bread and a cup of watered wine. She had a way of reading his face that he had never quite learned to hide from. She asked him how the day had gone. He told her of the brothers and the ruling he had given. Miriam listened without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded slowly and said, "You are certain you heard everything that needed to be heard?" Azariah paused. He had heard both men speak. He had asked questions. What more was there to hear? Miriam did not press. She never did. But her question stayed with him through the evening meal and into the night, where he lay awake in the dark, listening to the distant bleating of goats and the soft stir of the wind through the grain fields beyond the village. He was certain, and yet, the next morning, Azariah walked to the well at the center of the village, as was his custom. There he encountered EnlitenU, an older man whose hair had long since turned the color of ash and whose movements had slowed with the weight of many years. EnlitenU had once been a scribe in the service of a minor official in one of the larger towns, but he had returned to the village decades ago and had lived quietly ever since, tending a small flock and speaking rarely. When he did speak, however, people listened, not because he raised his voice, but because his words had a way of arriving only when they were needed, like rain after a long dry season. EnlitenU was drawing water when Azariah approached. He looked up and offered a small nod of greeting. Azariah returned it and lowered his own vessel into the well. For a moment, neither spoke. Then EnlitenU said, "I heard you gave a ruling yesterday concerning the sons of old Joseph." Azariah straightened. "I did. The law is clear on the matter of inheritance." EnlitenU nodded slowly, pulling up his rope. "And the younger son, tell me, he accepted the ruling?" "He left without protest." EnlitenU poured the water into his clay jug with careful hands. Silence is not always acceptance. Azariah felt a flicker of irritation. "I cannot read a man's heart. I can only apply what is written." EnlitenU set down his jug and looked at Azariah with eyes that held no challenge, only a kind of patient inquiry. He said, "There is a proverb I have thought of often in my years. The one who states his case first seems right, until the other comes and examines him." Azariah recognized the words. Proverbs 18, verse 17. He had taught it himself many times, but hearing it now, in this context, felt like a finger pressed against a bruise. "I heard both brothers," he said. His voice was measured, but something in his chest had begun to tighten. EnlitenU nodded again. "You heard them both speak. But did you hear what each one was truly saying?" Azariah did not answer immediately. The question was not an accusation. It was not even a disagreement. It was simply an invitation to look again, to examine what he had already decided. And something in him resisted it deeply. Azariah had spent years building a reputation on the strength of his judgments. To revisit this one, to admit even the possibility of incompleteness, felt like a loosening of the very foundation on which he stood. But EnlitenU did not press. He simply lifted his jug, inclined his head in farewell, and walked slowly back toward his home, leaving Azariah alone by the well. For the rest of that morning, Azariah went about his usual tasks. He met with a young man who had questions about the proper observance of a feast day. He visited a widow whose roof needed repair and arranged for one of the village craftsmen to assist her. He taught a small group of boys the opening verses of the Shema, correcting their pronunciation with the same patient firmness he had used for decades. But beneath all of it, EnlitenU's question continued to turn in his mind like a stone that would not settle. Did you hear what each one was truly saying? By midday, Azariah found himself walking toward the home of Talmai, the younger brother. He told himself he was simply checking on the man, ensuring that the ruling had not left lasting bitterness. But even as he walked, he knew that something deeper had drawn him here, something he was not yet willing to name. Talmai was in his courtyard, mending a torn fishing net. He looked up as Azariah approached, and his expression was guarded, but not hostile. "Teacher," he said. I did not expect to see you again." Azariah stood at the edge of the courtyard, uncertain how to begin. He had come with questions, but now that he was here, the words felt clumsy in his mouth. Finally, Talmai said, "I came to ask you something." He set down the net. "What is it?" Azariah hesitated. Then slowly, he said, "When you spoke of your father's promise, you said he spoke to you in his final days. I want to understand more clearly what he said, not to change my ruling, but to understand." Talmai studied him for a long moment. Then he gestured to a low bench near the courtyard wall. Azariah sat, and Talmai began to speak. He spoke of his father's illness, of the long nights sitting beside him, holding water to his lips. He spoke of the quiet conversations they had shared, the old man's regrets, his hopes for both his sons. He spoke of the moment when his father had taken his hand and said, "You have been faithful. You have stayed. I want you to have what I would have given you if I had been a better father." Azariah listened without interrupting. He did not argue. He did not explain the law again. He simply listened, and as he did, something in him began to shift. He realized, with a clarity that unsettled him, that he had heard Talmai speak before, but he had not truly listened. He had been so certain of the answer that he had stopped asking questions. He had applied the law, yes, but he had not walked humbly in the presence of a grieving son. The words of the prophet Micah rose in his memory. "He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." Azariah had always understood humility as a posture before God, but now, sitting in Talmai's courtyard, he began to see it differently. Humility was not merely submission. It was not silence or self-erasure. It was the willingness to be examined, to be questioned, to consider that one's certainty might be incomplete. He had been so determined to act justly that he had forgotten to love mercy. And he had been so confident in his knowledge that he had stopped walking humbly. He thanked Talmai for speaking with him. He did not promise to change the ruling, but he said, "I will think on what you have told me. That is all I can offer you now." Talmai looked at him with something that might have been surprise. Then he nodded slowly and returned to his net. If this story has stirred something in you, a memory of a time when you were certain, but perhaps not teachable, I invite you to pause for a moment. You are not alone in that struggle. Consider sharing this with someone who might need to hear it. That evening, Azariah walked again to the olive grove. He did not go to sit beneath the trees this time, but to stand among them, letting their silence settle around him. He thought of all the rulings he had given over the years. Most of them, he believed, had been fair. But how many had been complete? How many times had he spoken before he had truly heard? How many times had his certainty prevented him from asking the next question? He thought of Eliam's gentle challenge by the well. The old man had not accused him of wrongdoing. He had not raised his voice or questioned Azariah's authority. He had simply asked a question and then stepped back, leaving room for Azariah to examine himself. That, Azariah realized, was civility. Not politeness for its own sake, not the avoidance of truth, but the discipline of speaking in a way that invited reflection rather than demanding surrender. Eliam had disagreed with him, but he had done so without domination, without shaming, without the need to be seen as the one who was right. Azariah had not yet learned to do the same. When he was challenged, his instinct was to defend. When he was questioned, his impulse was to explain more forcefully, as if volume could substitute for truth. He had mistaken confidence for righteousness and certainty for wisdom. But wisdom, he was beginning to see, was not the absence of doubt. It was the willingness to hold one's convictions lightly enough, to examine them, to test them, to let them be refined by the questions of others. He thought of the words he had taught so many times from the letter to the Philippians, words about Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant? He had always understood this passage as a description of divine humility, the mystery of God becoming human. But now he wondered if it was also an invitation. If the one who held all power could lay it down, then surely Azariah could lay down his certainty. Surely he could empty himself of the need to be seen as the one who is always right. This was not weakness. It was not silence. It was the kind of strength that did not need to dominate in order to be real. The days that followed were not easy. Azariah met again with Nadav, the elder brother, and asked if he would be willing to hear Talmai's account of their father's final words. At first, Nadav resisted. He had won the ruling. Why should he revisit it? But Azariah did not demand. He did not invoke his authority or his knowledge of the law. He simply said, "I am not asking you to give up what is yours by right. I am asking you to listen." That is all. Nadav agreed, reluctantly. The three of them met in the olive grove the following morning. Talmai spoke again of his father's final days. Nadav listened, at first with skepticism, then with something closer to grief. He had not been present during those final conversations. He had been tending the flocks, believing there would be time later to speak with their father. There had not been. By the end of the morning, no new ruling had been made. The law still favored Nadav's claim, but something had shifted between the brothers. They began to speak not as adversaries, but as sons who had both lost a father. They agreed to work the land together for the coming season, and to revisit the question of division after the harvest. It was not a perfect resolution. It was not the kind of clean judgment that Azariah had once prided himself on delivering. But it was honest. It left room for mercy. And it had only been possible because Azariah had been willing to examine his certainty rather than defend it. A woman pauses at her kitchen table, phone in hand, reading a message from her sister that stings with criticism. Her first instinct is to respond immediately, to defend herself, to correct the record. But something holds her back. She sets the phone down, breathes, and wonders what she might be missing. The reply can wait until she has listened more carefully to what her sister is actually trying to say. In the weeks that followed, Azariah found himself teaching differently. He still spoke with conviction. He still believed in the importance of the law and the clarity of truth. But he began to leave more room for questions. He began to invite examination rather than simply delivering conclusions. One afternoon, a young student asked him how a person could be humble and still speak with confidence. Was humility not the same as quietness, the same as holding back? Azariah thought for a long moment before answering. Then he said, "Humility is not the absence of voice. It is the willingness to be corrected. It is the recognition that I may see truly, but I may not see completely. To speak with humility is not to speak without conviction. It is to speak without the need to dominate, to silence, or to win." The student nodded slowly, as if turning the words over in his mind. Azariah continued, "And civility, which is the companion of humility, is the discipline of how we speak when we disagree. It is not softness for its own sake. It is not the avoidance of truth. It is the choice to speak in a way that respects the dignity of the one who hears, even when dignity is strained, even when we believe we are right." He paused, then added, "Especially when we believe we are right." Eliam, who had been sitting nearby, listening without comment, rose and placed a hand briefly on Azariah's shoulder. He said nothing, but the gesture carried its own weight, an acknowledgement of something that had changed, a quiet affirmation of the work that had been done. Azariah understood then that teachability was not a destination. It was a posture, a way of walking through the world. He would continue to make judgments. He would continue to study and teach. But he would do so with a different kind of certainty now, one that did not need to be defended because it was always open to examination. The olive grove remained standing at the edge of the village, its trees growing slowly, their roots reaching deep into soil that had been tended by many hands over many generations. And in the shade of those trees, the people continued to gather, to speak, to disagree, and sometimes, when they were willing, to listen. Not because the listening was easy, not because it came naturally, but because they had learned, slowly and imperfectly, that truth spoken without humility could wound, and that certainty defended without civility could divide. They had learned that power could be laid down, that speech could be governed, that the one who states his case first may seem right, but wisdom waits for the examination. And they had learned, perhaps most importantly, that the question "I may be right, but am I teachable?" was not a sign of weakness. It was the beginning of wisdom. Azariah lived many more years in that village. He taught many more students. He gave many more rulings. And when he died, full of years and surrounded by those who had known him, the thing they remembered most was not the sharpness of his judgments or the breadth of his knowledge. It was the way he had learned to listen. It was the way he had learned to say, "Tell me more. Help me understand. I may have missed something." It was the way he had walked, not with the certainty of one who had all the answers, but with the humility of one who was still willing to be taught. And that, in the end, was the mark of a life well lived. If this story has spoken to you, if it has stirred something in the way you think about certainty, humility, or the way we speak to one another when we disagree, I would be grateful if you would take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Your engagement helps others find these reflections and reminds me that the work of storytelling matters. Thank you for listening. May you walk humbly, speak with restraint, and remain always teachable.
Thank you for sharing this sacred story with me. If it touched your heart, you may also find peace and clarity in our Meditative Reflections playlist, a series of guided meditations inspired by these very Bible stories. Each one is crafted to help you slow down, breathe deeply, and connect more fully with God's presence in your life. Remember to subscribe, leave a comment if something resonated with you, and share this with someone who may need a little hope today. Until next time, transforming minds and empowering souls, and as always, peace, love, light, and unity.